Hidden deep in the woods of Spring City, Pennsylvania, Pennhurst Asylum stands as a decaying reminder of one of the darkest chapters in psychiatric care. Once known as the Pennhurst State School and Hospital, it opened in 1908 to treat mentally and physically disabled patients. But behind its walls, the asylum became a house of horrors, notorious for overcrowding, abuse, and neglect. The cries of the forgotten echoed through its filthy halls as patients were subjected to inhumane treatments. The sheer misery and torment that filled the asylum soon left a mark, with staff and visitors alike reporting strange occurrences, from shadowy figures to eerie whispers that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. Though Pennhurst closed its doors in 1987, its dark legacy remains disturbingly alive. Paranormal investigators and thrill seekers are drawn to the asylum, hoping to catch a glimpse of the lingering spirits that are said to haunt its empty wards. Apparitions of former patients, unexplained noises, and cold, invisible hands have left many visitors terrified. The asylum's haunted reputation, steeped in decades of suffering and death, continues to grow, making it one of the most infamous and chilling locations in America.
Among Pennhurst's most tragic cases were the children, sent there because their families couldn't care for them. Many of these children spent their entire lives within the asylum's walls. Some were mentally disabled, others were simply abandoned, deemed too difficult for society to handle. What they all shared, however, was the horror of Pennhurst's neglect. The children were left in cribs, often for days, without being fed or cleaned. Some would cry out for hours, only to be met with silence from the overworked and indifferent staff. As the years passed, these children became invisible to the outside world. Some were tied to their beds, their bodies wasting away from neglect, while others grew wild and violent from the trauma they endured. The few who were able to speak would talk of the dark man who watched them from the shadows, a figure they could never describe, but always sensed lurking nearby. Staff brushed off these stories as mere fantasies, the product of broken minds, but some began to wonder if there was something more sinister at play. One of the most chilling legends to emerge from Pennhurst is that of a little girl named Emily. Emily was brought to the asylum as a toddler and spent her short life in one of the children's wards. She was known for her bright blue eyes and her habit of singing softly to herself. But after Emily's death, likely from neglect patients, and staff began to report hearing a child's voice singing late at night. Visitors to the asylum, long after it closed, have claimed to hear her voice echoing down the halls, a faint, haunting melody that seems to come from nowhere. To this day, the children's ward remains one of the most active areas for paranormal investigators. The playful sounds of laughter, tiny footsteps, and soft whispers can be heard in the empty rooms. Some have even seen the figure of a small girl in a faded hospital gown, her bright blue eyes staring out from the darkness. Emily may be gone, but her spirit and the spirits of the other forgotten children remain, eternally trapped within the walls of Pennhurst. Not all the patients at Pennhurst were docile or defenseless. Ward 4 housed the most violent and unstable individuals, many of whom had been deemed dangerous for society. This ward became known for its terrifying atmosphere, filled with a sense of dread that even the most hardened staff could feel. Screams and cries of rage would echo through the night, often followed by violent outbursts as patients lashed out at one another or at themselves. It was in Ward 4 that some of the darkest paranormal activity was reported. Staff began noticing that the doors, locked from the outside, would sometimes be found wide open in the morning, with no explanation as to how they had been unlocked. Some of the more aggressive patients claimed to see a figure in the corners of their rooms at night, a tall, shadowy man who whispered dark things to them. Though they were already troubled, their fear of this entity was palpable, and their reactions became more violent and unhinged. One of the ward's most chilling stories involves a nurse named Margaret, who worked the night shift in Ward 4. One evening, while making her rounds, she heard the sound of metal scraping against the floor. Following the noise, she found a patient standing in the corner, staring at the ceiling, his bed having been pushed to the opposite side of the room. When she asked him what he was doing, he simply said, "He told me to move it." Shaken, Margaret left the room, but before the night was over, she would encounter the same patient again, this time standing outside his room, though his door had been locked moments before. Margaret eventually quit, unable to shake the feeling that something evil was lurking in the asylum. Paranormal investigators who visit Ward 4 today often report being scratched, pushed, or suddenly overcome with nausea. Shadow figures are seen darting across the halls, and strange voices are captured on audio recordings, often whispering, "Get out." Whatever haunts Ward 4 seems to feed on fear and anger, just as it did when the patients were alive. By 1987, after decades of abuse allegations and lawsuits, Pennhurst was finally shut down. The patients were relocated, but the asylum's dark legacy was far from over. Since its closure, Pennhurst has become a magnet for paranormal investigators, urban explorers, and thrill seekers. But many who venture into its decaying buildings leave with stories of their own encounters with something otherworldly, something angry. It's said that the souls of those who suffered there remain, trapped in a cycle of torment, reliving their pain over and over again. Visitors to the asylum often report hearing screams, footsteps, and whispers that come from nowhere. Some have seen the apparitions of former patients wandering the halls, their vacant eyes staring ahead, lost in a loop of misery. In the dead of night, doors slam shut, unseen hands grab at clothing, and the oppressive feeling of being watched is ever present. Those who enter Pennhurst speak of a heavy atmosphere that makes it hard to breathe, as if the very air is thick with sorrow. One of the most terrifying encounters involved a group of ghost hunters who explored the tunnels beneath Pennhurst. Deep underground, far from the light of day, they heard a child's laughter echoing through the darkness, followed by the sound of dragging footsteps. When they turned to leave, they were met by a figure at the end of the tunnel, a tall, shadowy man who stood still, watching them. The group fled, but the sensation of cold, clammy hands brushing against them persisted long after they escaped. Today, Pennhurst remains a chilling reminder of the cruelty and neglect that took place within its walls. The spirits of the asylum's forgotten residents seem to linger, their suffering imprinted on the very fabric of the building. While Pennhurst is now open for ghost tour and paranormal investigations, it's clear that not everyone who visits leaves alone. For those who died within its walls, there is no escape, only the eternal echo of the damned.